Good evening, everybody. I'm David Asman. Thanks for watching. I'm in for Lou Dobbs. Tonight's top stories: the deep state stonewalling drags on. The Department of Justice misses another deadline to cooperate with Congress and hand over documents related to the Russia witch hunt. We're going to take it up tonight with Pennsylvania Congressman Keith Rothfuss. Plus, the trade showdown with China begins after years of lying, cheating, and stealing from the U.S. The Chinese government now accusing the Trump administration of behaving like, quote, hoodlums. And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo arriving in North Korea with a Rocket Man CD for Kim Jong-un. You can't make this up, but his real message to the regime in Pyongyang will be no laughing matter. Gordon Chang is here to weigh in on the latest round of negotiations. But our top story, the Justice Department again failing to meet a deadline today to turn over key subpoenaed documents related to the Russia investigation. House Freedom Caucus Chairman Mark Meadows has threatened to either hold Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein in contempt of Congress or impeach Rosenstein for failure to comply. Chief Intel Correspondent Catherine Herridge here now with the very latest.
David, a source close to the process, tells Fox News that the newly available records do not fully comply with congressional subpoenas. And barring new developments tonight, the latest records do not meet the House resolution deadline. Three House Republican Committee Chairmen Trey Gowdy on Oversight, Devin Nunes on Intelligence, and Bob Goodlatte on Judiciary requested the records. Fox News is told that House staffers viewed records at the Justice Department Thursday because lawmakers were out for the holiday recess, concluding the Justice Department and FBI are still withholding documents. In April, a subpoena was issued for a key set of records focused on FBI activities before the FBI Russia case officially opened on July 31st, 2016. The source said the Justice Department and FBI have not provided all records or information about this critical time period that likely show why the Russia probe started in the first place.
What put all of this into motion? And of course, was what put all of this into motion something that was politically motivated, or was it in fact based on legitimate law enforcement evidence?
FBI Director Christopher Wray and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein were on Capitol Hill last week and faced new pressure to comply after the passage of a non-binding House resolution along party lines, 226 to 183. Those who know Rosenstein emphasize he's in a difficult position because it's not routine, they say, to provide records from ongoing cases.
I know Rod Rosenstein, and I think he's an honorable person, and I think anybody in that position would take it personally if they're going to say that you personally have been obstructing Congress or holding things back. I think that he views himself as kind of the point of a spear in a process and the one who has to interact with Congress.
A congressional aide for the House Judiciary Committee said the Justice Department has provided more records and asked for more time. A spokesman for the Intelligence Committee went further, saying the department is not in compliance. A Justice Department spokeswoman declined to comment, adding they will respond directly to the House committees. David?
Catherine Herridge, thank you very much. Joining me now is Pennsylvania Congressman Keith Rothfuss. He serves on the House Judiciary Committee and the House Committee on Financial Services. Great to see you, Congressman. Thank you for being here.
David, good to be here with you tonight. And again, very troubling that the Department of Justice and FBI are again dragging their feet. I was just reading the report today.
It was the last time you were here, the same thing happened. I mean, this has to stop, right?
Well, I'm just reading a report today about new memos that are being reviewed. And there's a memo in October of 2016 where Strzok is emailing somebody and saying vis-a-vis McCabe and having McCabe review the FISA warrant and hurry the F up. You know, what is going on? And why are they waiting forever to produce these documents? We have a legitimate, responsible oversight of the executive branch, and they've been dragging their feet. The Inspector General, who put his 500-page report, Horowitz put out his report about several weeks ago, we're producing texts that we never saw, things like Peter Strzok, again, Peter Strzok, always Peter Strzok, saying that we will stop him, referring to President Trump, or then candidate Trump, in August 2016.
So how do you make Rosenstein responsible, accountable to what's going on?
Well, I'd like to see what they have produced today. I'm sure the committee is taking a look at that. When we get back to Washington early next week, we're going to have to see what the scope of their compliance has been. And then you have to look at things like holding them in contempt. That you cannot continue to flaunt the people's representatives in the United States Congress.
Well, I'm just reading. Forgive me for turning away from the camera. I'm going to have to do that as I read an email from our own Catherine Herridge, who's just reporting this as we speak, that the Department of Justice spokesperson, Sarah Flores, declined to answer Fox's questions, including allegations on the recently provided records were not enough to satisfy the House. Clearly, you're not satisfied. So again, the question is specifically, what do you threaten Rod Rosenstein with if he doesn't produce what you've asked for?
I think you start with looking at a contempt proceeding. Again, we have a legitimate inquiry out there. They have been dragging their feet for months. These documents that they're being reviewed, again, I'm just reading a report today about these emails from the FBI and Department of Justice that we should have known about months ago. And you look at that text message, again, the one I highlighted that we found out about in the Inspector General's report. Again, why are they trickling out these documents? What is going on inside the Department of Justice, inside the FBI? This is happening at the top levels. I know many good people who are on frontline attorneys, frontline agents in the FBI, in U.S. Attorney's office across the country doing their job, protecting this country.
Right.
And it's unfortunate that you have folks at the headquarters who have not been cooperative with the United States Congress.
It looks like what Rosenstein is interested in is protecting the deep state in the FBI and the DOJ. I mean, that's what he is protecting because he's not releasing documents that you have to get from the Inspector General.
And well, there's certainly a pattern there. Look at the redactions that we had to have uncovered just a couple months ago with respect to the House Intelligence Committee report, where they were redacting things that weren't trying to protect confidential sources or methods, but things that made the FBI not look too good. This has to stop, and this is very frustrating that these agencies continue to flaunt the representatives of the American people.
Well, one thing that you are doing is continuing with your hearings to try to get to the bottom of the Russia matter. You've got a very important hearing next Thursday. Is Peter Strzok going to be attending?
That's being worked out right now. He's certainly looking forward to his testimony. He has been subpoenaed. Conversations are having, as I understand it, conversations are ongoing between Mr. Strzok's attorneys and the committee. And so I hope that he will come before and start to answer some of the questions we have.
What do you do if he's a no-show?
Again, you have to take one step at a time. And if he's a no-show, we have to have some process that's going to bring him in.
Now, he was at a closed-door hearing last week. What was he like at that hearing? What was his demeanor? I know you can't be specific about what he said, but how did he say it? Because we've heard some interesting reports.
Well, you know, I just popped in a couple times to see what was going on, and he was responding to the questions that were being asked. I think there are a lot of questions that need to be followed up on. Some of the answers, again, we have a responsibility, I think, to have a hearing with him there, and he can respond to what was going on during that deposition.
Now, we have heard some reports, to be specific, that he had kind of a flippant manner, that he was laughing off a lot of questions rather than answering them directly. Can you be more specific about that?
I'm looking for him to come before the committee and start to answer some of the very difficult questions that need to be answered about his conduct during both the email investigation and during the investigation of Russian collusion.
By the way, next week is going to be a very important week for your Judiciary Committee in several ways, not only with your work with Peter Strzok, but you're also going to be dealing with, or at least contemplating, the new Supreme Court justice pick. Can you tell us anything about that? Do you have a particular favorite among those who've been mentioned?
Well, there are a number of, everybody that has been mentioned is of very high quality. There are a couple that have attracted my attention, one being one of my constituents, Tom Hardiman, here in Western Pennsylvania.
We like
he was
Tom
the runner-up
Hardiman
last time. And I'm a Notre Dame law grad. I know Tom went to Notre Dame undergrad. It'd be great to have somebody from Notre Dame represented on that court.
He's actually my favorite, I have to tell you, just because he does have a sense of the Midwest. He's not that kind of inside the Beltway guy like Brett Kavanaugh, who is displeased a number of conservatives, including Ted Cruz, who said he wouldn't vote for him. Do you feel the same?
I would like to, and again, I don't know where Judge Kavanaugh went to law school. It would be nice if we had somebody beyond Harvard or Yale represented on the court, or Stanford. There are good law schools out there, Notre Dame being one of them. And although Tom went to Georgetown, I think, Georgetown Law School. But again, we're looking forward to the president's pick on Monday night.
All right.
And we'll have some news then.
Well, and please let us know what happens with Peter Strzok. Whatever you can tell us, we'll be very interested. Please come back and see us again. Keith Rothfuss, thank you so much for coming in tonight. Appreciate it.
Good talking with you tonight.
Good talking with you. Coming up next, China hitting back at the U.S. as the trade showdown between the two countries escalates. We're going to have the Dean, Ed Rollins, is here to discuss that and much more. Stay with us.
This program is brought to you by Experian. Identity protection has a new identity.
If theft were this frequent, you'd definitely do something about it. Well, it is. An identity is stolen every 2 seconds.
The trade showdown between the U.S. and China is underway. China imposing tariffs on $34 billion worth of U.S. goods today, just hours after the Trump administration imposed its own tariffs on roughly the same amount of Chinese products. China accusing the U.S. of typical, and I'm quoting here, typical trade bullying. The Trump administration says the tariffs are a response to China's theft of American intellectual property and technology and other unfair trade practices.
Look,
Joining me now is the Dean himself, Ed Rollins, chairman of Great America PAC and Hall of Fame political consultant. Rollins served as White House political director on President Ronald Reagan, who, even though he was a free trader, Ed, we got to remember he practiced some tough love and with regard to our trading partners, right?
You have to do that. I mean, obviously, the critical question here is what President Trump is doing. Is this tough love? Is this kind of a guidance of how we're going to deal in the future, or is it something that's going to have big consequences long term? I've been to China 20 times. The Chinese are very, very tough. They're very shrewd. They have a different system of where it is not a corporation does anything that the government.
They're communists. Let's spell it out. It's a communist system,
and so
it's not a free trade. It's not a free
trade, and so it's just what I think. I don't think it's going to be a short-term fight once it starts, and I think we need to be prepared for the long-term consequences.
And it begs a question. They are a communist government. Can you have a free trade agreement with a country that does not believe in rule of law? The basis of communism is that the rule of law is whatever it happens to be to benefit the state. They don't care about adherence to the rule of law. And clearly, they have lied, they have cheated, and they have violated every part of the World Trade Organization that they signed into in 2001.
I've always said to American companies that want to go do business there, and they're all interested in getting their deal, and they say, I've got a signed deal. I said, great, where are you going to get it enforced? Well, my lawyers say, I said, well, your lawyers aren't going to get it done. Everything in Asia is about relationships, and this is going to be a real test. She and Trump started off on a good footing.
They did,
and I think to a certain extent they're two tough guys. One guy's going to be there forever, in the sense of as long as he wants, and I think Trump needs to be tough and firm and very clear to the American public what he's doing, because there are going to be consequences.
But the bottom line is free trade is great as long as the trading partners abide by the rules, as long as you have rule of law. And when you're dealing with a country that doesn't have rule of law because it's a communist country, you're not going to have a fair trading partner to deal with.
And equally as important, the idea that you're going to hurt them. They've been through long wars before. And obviously, we have to make sure our farmers and everybody else understand there's consequences. Long term, it'll be benefitous, but short term, it's going to be painful.
Now, we brought them into the World Trade Organization, understanding that they had problems dealing with the rule of law because they're a communist country. But the idea was, and I was working at the Wall Street Journal at the time, and the Wall Street Journal had views that perhaps if we open our doors to China, they will become more democratic. Well, we opened our doors to China, and they took advantage of it. They violated the rules, and they have become less democratic. And as you mentioned, she is now president for life. So it's gone exactly the opposite of the way that free traders were hoping it would go.
Well, sometimes hope and wishes are not the best
policies.
Best
they don't lead to the best policies.
My sense is this has to be a real exchange of strength This has to be a real exchange of clear ideas, and Trump has to stay in this for the long term.
All right. Now, the markets, as you saw today, were totally unfazed. They were much more affected by this terrific news on the job front. As long as our economy continues to expand, meaning that more people are going to be hired, meaning that people who have lousy jobs can trade up to a better job, will any of this have a long-term effect, particularly as we approach an election in November?
I worry about the farm community, and I worry about, because we are a party still of suburban and rural voters, and obviously long-term for them, it'll benefit them, but short-term, all of a sudden there's a panic in the farm community and some of them start turning and not be as intense on the vote as they have been in the past, then I think to a certain extent it could hurt us.
So looking at those farming states in particular,
congressional seats particularly,
is that where the Republicans should be focusing now, and perhaps even cutting some deal with China and perhaps the Europeans that would positively affect our trade relations with the farming community?
I'm not a trader, so I don't know. I don't have expertise on that front. I do know politics. And I do think there are some consequences here that we're going to pay a little price. And I think what you've got to argue is, let's just get through this midterm, keep fighting on the Trump policies, and don't try and weaken them in the short term.
But the problem is, we're in it now.
We're definitely in it.
We started the volleys today in the past 24 hours. It may be ratcheted up again. So I'm just wondering, usually the president's timing is exquisite. In this case, I'm wondering if the timing to start this battle was right.
Well, I hope we've planned to go all the way. We still have a very divided White House about where we are and where we're going, certainly division in the business community. My sense is we're now in the battle. They certainly have made their decisions in China, and they're not going to roll over and play dead, and they're not going to give us a quick fix.
Ed Rollins, great to see you, my friend. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend. And be sure to vote in tonight's poll. Do you believe it's time for Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein to face real consequences for his continual stonewalling of congressional document requests? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. And be sure to follow Lou on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like him on Facebook and Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. Coming up next, new questions about a plea deal, ignoring national security violations, political cover-up, and the IT scandal linked to Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Have you heard about this? You may not have. You want to. We're going to be talking to the Daily Caller's Luke Rosiak about what's next in the case of Imran Awan right after a short break. Stay with us. Scandal that the mainstream media continues to ignore almost entirely. The Justice Department this week agreeing not to prosecute Debbie Wasserman Schultz's IT aide for House cybersecurity and theft. Imran Awan pleading guilty to minor bank fraud charges. He's expected to receive probation at his sentencing hearing on August 21. Now, Awan was transferring money from the Congressional Federal Credit Union to Pakistan before trying to flee the country. Our next guest says many crimes clearly took place in the Awan case, but there is no will to prosecute. Joining me now, Daily Caller investigative reporter Luke Rosiak. Luke, congratulations. You're one of the few people who's been working hard on this story. What was, to the best of your knowledge and your suspicions, what was Awan up to?
This is a guy that had access to all the emails and files of 1 in 5 members of Congress. Wow. And when you talk to his relatives and people who know him very well, he's motivated by money. This is a guy with an unstoppable quench for money. He'll do nothing. He'll stop at nothing to get it. And as part of his job, he had access to all this sensitive information. He also was in charge of ordering computer equipment for Congress, a lot of it, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth. And so what investigators found is two separate things. Number one was a financial scheme in the House of Representatives where invoices were being falsified so that hundreds of thousands of dollars of computers were not tracked. They were treated like petty cash. And then the second thing, which is more worrisome, is that he was accessing members of Congress's computers and logging into their personal usernames in ways that he had no legitimate reason for doing so. And when you talk to people who know him very well in his background and all through his past, this is a guy who's been repeatedly accused of what's essentially extortion. So that's what we worry about here, is the leverage that he has over members of
and he
members
was
of
also,
Congress.
what worries me in addition to that is the fact that he was also clearly had contacts in Pakistan. And Pakistan, yes, it's supposedly an ally, but it's an ally that I'm very wary of. It's also a country that has some very suspicious banking practices of its own. There was a bank called BCCI that was a terribly corrupt, supposedly the most corrupt bank ever in history, was dealing with terrorists, drug dealers, etc. That was based in Pakistan. And if this guy was sending money to a banking institution in Pakistan, giving them access to a federal credit union, the most important federal credit union in the country, that of Congress, that could be very dangerous.
Well, this guy was wiring hundreds of thousands of dollars to Pakistan. The FBI has hundreds of suspicious activity reports from banks documenting bizarre arrangements with cash flying every which way, cash from different bank accounts being withdrawn, deposited, sent over. His family had about a dozen LLCs. One of them was a purported car dealership that had fake employees listed on its website and took $100,000 from an Iraqi government minister while these guys were working for members of the intelligence committee.
So why, let me cut to the chase here. Why did the DOJ give him immunity then with all these charges and potential charges against him?
Well, that's what they can't explain, and they didn't explain, is there's a tremendous amount of evidence here, and the FBI from the beginning refused to investigate. And that's why I've been following this case for 18 months. I knew it was rigged from the beginning, and as a reporter, you kind of get the sense that there's a cover-up afoot, and that makes you want to pursue it more.
Well, and as a reporter, you get the sense that the reason that they gave him, they cut him a deal was because he had all his sensitive information on Congress. And,
right.
and these correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they were all Democrat Congress people, but they were afraid, and they might have used their influence on DOJ to cut this guy a deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And this guy, I mean, he had access to all of their emails, and the lawyers were actually pretty clear, his lawyers, what they would say if he was taken to trial. They were going to, number one, blame Democrats and congressmen for basically not caring about cybersecurity. It turns out that the Congress has such shoddy cybersecurity, it's like equivalent to like a grandma's Hotmail account. Like they just run it so sloppily. And they were going to put that on the Democrats who talk about Russia all the time. It's hypocritical, it's embarrassing. The second thing is this procurement scheme. When they're falsifying these invoices, what no one really mentioned is that the chiefs of staff have to sign off on that. And so they were going to implicate members of Congress and chiefs of staff in a procurement scheme, the systematic cooking of the books in Congress.
Wow.
And one person in particular, a guy named Shelley Davis, he was the chief of staff for Congresswoman Yvette Clarke from New York. Democratic chief of staff implicated him as working with these guys in a kickback scheme. So basically, some people said, is this guy being protected by the DOJ because he's going to squeal on members? That's not what it was. It was if you prosecute him, that's when there's going to be this spectacle. It would be the trial of the decade.
No, absolutely.
You've had members testifying.
The deep state was deathly afraid of what this guy was going to reveal. Finally, we only have about 30 seconds for this. He had Debbie Wasserman Schultz's PC and it was planted in a phone booth. What's the story there? I mean, it's bizarre.
So after he was banned from Congress, he came into the House building at midnight, left Debbie Wasserman Schultz's laptop in a phone booth, and he put a piece of paper on top, and it said attorney-client privilege. So then later, he tries to flee the country, and he's arrested, and they introduce the laptop as evidence, and he says, well, I said attorney-client privilege, so you can't use it. And Jeff Sessions, Mr. Magoo, he says, well, I guess we can't look at it then, and they never try. So when Trump talks about a server, he's not talking about the DNC. He's talking about the Debbie Wasserman Schultz's laptop and the House Democratic Caucus server, which the cops said went missing.
Why do you think? By the way, why do you think we only have 10 seconds? Why do you think Jeff Sessions was not interested in getting to the bottom of that?
Well, he was unwilling to take on 40 angry Democrats. But if Trump wants to know how Sessions reacts when he's not recused, it turns out it's not any different than how he acts when he is subject to a recusal.
Yeah. Luke Rosiak, great work. I mean, terrific journalistic work. Of course, you got it all to yourself because the mainstream media isn't interested in this story. So congratulations. You've done the best with it. Luke, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up next, Secretary of State Pompeo visiting North Korea for the first time since the historic Singapore summit. Gordon Chang joining us next to take up the administration's efforts to denuclearize the rogue regime. Stay with us. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visiting North Korea today for the first time since the historic Trump-Kim summit. Pompeo met with high-ranking North Korean officials to discuss plans to denuclearize the Korean peninsula. However, numerous reports show the rogue regime continuing to expand its nuclear arsenal. Last night, General Jack Keane was here, spoke to me about the importance of Pompeo's meeting in Pyongyang.
Secretary Pompeo will remind Kim Jong-un what the alternative is. If you're not forthcoming with a plan to execute denuclearization, here's what we're going to do. We're going right back to maximum sanctions. And if we don't get China's cooperation, we fully intend to sanction them. We're going to move towards military preparedness so we get ready for a military option. And everything will begin to change rather dramatically if we don't get the results that the administration has insisted on and the results that Kim Jong-un has promised.
Joining me now is Gordon Chang, Daily Beast contributor and author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. Well, according to General Keane, he thinks there's a showdown going on right now between Pompeo and the North Koreans. What do you think?
He's absolutely right. This meeting between Pompeo and the North Korean officials is make or break. And it's because of all that we've learned about the weaponization. They've continued on at an increased pace. So this has got to be a point where Pompeo looks at what the regime is doing. You know, and if the
by the way, he's looking at images. There's a picture of him shaking hands with the North Korean leaders. But I think we can put up the time-lapse photography. It's this missile plant that they have gone right along in building. This is a time-lapse photography courtesy of the Wall Street Journal, where you can see the plant being built. This is evidence. I mean, it's absolutely clear evidence. We, after all, have the full facilities of the CIA. We have a Secretary of State who was head of the CIA. So nobody has known more. No Secretary of State has known more than Pompeo about what the North Koreans are doing.
Yeah, there are two possibilities here, David. One of them is that the North Koreans never made a decision that we thought they made to give up their weapons. The second thing is that maybe Kim, in fact, made that decision, but that he doesn't control the military. Even before...
Which do you think it is?
I wish I knew. And the reason why this is of concern is even before this summit, North Korean regime watchers were always concerned that Kim didn't have a full grasp over the Korean People's Army. And over the last, let's say, 2 months, there's been two big developments which indicate that Kim, in fact, is not in command. There was the reshuffling at the top of the army, plus also at the end of last month, there was the execution of that lieutenant general. And that indicates that Kim has not fully consolidated his position with the army.
The good thing, there are several. First of all, we got to mention, as we always do, the Americans that were taken out of there as a result of the opening of these discussions, even before the summit took place. Thank God we got the hostages out. So there's already, for those who say, oh, we didn't do anything in North Korea, we have done something. We saved 3 American lives. That's significant. We're also cracking what's going on there. I mean, they've been operating in the shell that no administration before this one has been able to crack open. We're cracking it open. What we're finding is kind of mysterious. And as you say, we don't know the answers yet. But at least we're cracking it open. We're figuring out how it works and maybe how to get through it.
And this is really important because if we're going to have this long-term relationship with North Korea, if they really are going to give up their arsenal and open themselves up, we have to have those links. And this is important for us because, it would be good, at least theoretically, to have the North Koreans on our side rather than China's side, because China has been fueling this. They've been making Kim Jong-un defiant. That was what President Trump said after Kim's second meeting with the Chinese leader, the one in Dalian at the beginning of May. It appears that the Chinese have put the North Koreans up to bad behavior. So it's very important for us to wean the North Koreans away from Beijing because, China really is the big villain in the neighborhood.
Speaking of China, of course, we begin our sanctions against China within the past 24 hours. They countered with their own sanctions. The Chinese government has issued a statement that's kind of a tough sell. It says, quote, the United States has violated World Trade Organization rules and ignited the largest trade war in economic history. Well, there's just no, what has happened, it doesn't come any close to the largest trade war in economic history.
Well, and also, China launched this trade war decades ago with this unprecedented assault, not just on the United States, but on the norms of global trading. They do not believe in any notions of rule of law, as you've been talking about, but also they don't believe in comparative advantage, which is the fundamental principle of global commerce.
Was it a mistake to let them into the World Trade Organization in 2001 to begin with?
Yes. You just need a one-word answer. Yes.
Because you can't have a free trade agreement with a country that doesn't have rule of law. Free trade without rule of law leads to chaos or leads to the situation we now have. You have to have rule of law along with free trade, because if you don't have rule of law, as you don't in communist China, what's a law today could be a non-law the next day. Then you have chaos in any kind of relationship with an outside government.
And we have seen that in the last 5 years under Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler. You know, China's become much more predatory. They're closing up their markets. They're demanding that we open our markets.
And they're becoming less democratic. He's now the head of the country for life.
They're becoming much less democratic, much more coercive politically. You know, we have seen China go after U.S. companies and other companies in China. And this has really been directed from the top. And this is Xi Jinping.
Will they, we only have about 10 seconds. Will they bend? Will they cry uncle?
It depends whether Trump is willing to see this to the end. I think that our president will, and because of that, I'm optimistic about the way this turns out in the long term.
Gordon Chang, good to see you. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Be
David.
sure to vote in tonight's poll. Do you believe it's time for Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein to face real consequences for his continual stonewalling of congressional document requests? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Coming up next, new developments in the Thailand cave rescue after a Navy diver dies trying to save 12 boys and their coach. We have a full and gripping report you don't want to miss. That's coming next. The football coach trapped in a cave in northern Thailand. An experienced diver died trying to bring them additional supplies, and efforts to bring the group out safely have picked up speed as oxygen levels inside the cave have dropped and the weather deteriorates. Sky correspondent Alex Rossi reports from Chiang Rai province in Thailand.
The rescue teams are still grappling with the huge physical demands of this operation. Oxygen tanks are being relayed into position along the jagged tunnels of the cave complex. These pictures show clearly just how challenging it will be to get the boys out, none of whom can swim through the dark, flooded passageways.
Most cave divers will have training to rescue other cave divers out of a cave, but rescuing kids out of a cave, that is new to most of us.
And how soon do you think it'll happen?
It's today or tomorrow, I think.
And the dangers are becoming more and more apparent. Former Thai Navy SEAL Saman Gunan, a volunteer, died after losing consciousness on his way back from delivering tanks of air. The body of the 38-year-old was given a military escort to the airport. Celebrated as a national hero, he will be honoured with a royal-sponsored funeral in the next few days. The mood of this rescue operation has become more subdued following the death of one of the volunteers. But what hasn't wavered is the professionalism and the dedication of all of the teams involved. There is, though, an increasing sense of urgency. We've learnt that the levels of oxygen in the caves where the boys are trapped is deteriorating. There's also still the threat of more bad weather. Heavy monsoon rains are looming, forecast in the next 24 hours. For the moment, the football team remain trapped. They are being given medical treatment, but two of them and the coach are reportedly malnourished and weak. Their school friends, though, say they are resilient. I met two of the football team's members. Sethawat didn't attend practice on the day they entered the cave because he was sick. And Waranchit had overslept. He'd stayed up watching the World Cup. They showed me video of the training session they missed that day. Both are praying their mates will be rescued soon.
แต่ตอนนี้ก็โล่งใจขึ้นเยอะเลยครับเพราะว่าเจ้าหน้าที่เขาเจอเพื่อนแล้วครับก็อยากให้เพื่อนออกมานั่งกินข้าวด้วยกันหัวเราะด้วยกันครับซ้อมหนักมากครับจะทำให้ร่างกายแข็งแรงครับซ้อมฝึกกล้ามหน้าท้องอะไรพวกนี้ครับเร่งไขมันเร่งให้เป็นก้อนเป็นซิกแพคประมาณนี้ครับจะอยู่ได้นานครับ
But as the boys prepare for another night in the caves, it's still not clear whether a rescue operation is imminent. The teams are poised for their orders, but at the moment, it's still too dangerous to attempt to bring them out. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Northern Thailand.
What a dramatic story. Alex, thank you very much. On Wall Street, stocks closed higher. The Dow up 100 points. The S&P gained 23. The Nasdaq up 102. Volume on the big board, 2.5 billion shares. Stocks finished strong to end the week. The Dow up nearly 1%. The S&P up 1.5%. The Nasdaq up nearly 2.5%. The Trump economy continues to boom. 218,000 jobs added in June. That was more than expected. Unemployment went up slightly to 4% as more Americans return to the workforce. And a reminder to listen to Lou's reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. Coming up next, Vice President Pence putting Democrats on the defense over growing calls from the left to abolish ICE. Gina Loudon and Charlie Kirk are here next to discuss. A football coach trapped in a cave in northern Thailand. An experienced diver died trying to bring them additional supplies, and efforts to bring the group out safely have picked up speed as oxygen levels inside the cave have dropped and the weather deteriorates. Sky correspondent Alex Rossi reports from Chiang Rai province in Thailand.
The rescue teams are still grappling with the huge physical demands of this operation. Oxygen tanks are being relayed into position along the jagged tunnels of the cave complex. These pictures show clearly just how challenging it will be to get the boys out, none of whom can swim through the dark, flooded passageways.
Most cave divers will have training to rescue other cave divers out of a cave, but rescuing kids out of a cave, that is new to most of us.
And how soon do you think it'll happen?
It's today or tomorrow, I think.
And the dangers are becoming more and more apparent. Former Thai Navy SEAL Saman Gunan, a volunteer, died after losing consciousness on his way back from delivering tanks of air. The body of the 38-year-old was given a military escort to the airport. Celebrated as a national hero, he will be honoured with a royal-sponsored funeral in the next few days. The mood of this rescue operation has become more subdued following the death of one of the volunteers. But what hasn't wavered is the professionalism and the dedication of all of the teams involved. There is, though, an increasing sense of urgency. We've learnt that the levels of oxygen in the caves where the boys are trapped is deteriorating. There's also still the threat of more bad weather. Heavy monsoon rains are looming, forecast in the next 24 hours. For the moment, the football team remain trapped. They are being given medical treatment, but 2 of them and the coach are reportedly malnourished and weak. Their school friends, though, say they are resilient. I met 2 of the football team's members. Sethawat didn't attend practice on the day they entered the cave because he was sick. And Waranchit had overslept. He'd stayed up watching the World Cup. They showed me video of the training session they missed that day. Both are praying their mates will be rescued soon.
แต่ตอนนี้ก็โล่งใจขึ้นเยอะเลยครับเพราะว่าเจ้าหน้าที่เขาเจอเพื่อนแล้วครับก็อยากให้เพื่อนออกมานั่งกินข้าวด้วยกันหัวเราะด้วยกันครับซ้อมหนักมากครับจะทำให้ร่างกายแข็งแรงครับซ้อมฝึกกล้ามหน้าท้องอะไรพวกนี้ครับเร่งไขมันเร่งให้เป็นก้อนเป็นซิกแพคประมาณนี้ครับจะอยู่ได้นานครับ
But as the boys prepare for another night in the caves, it's still not clear whether a rescue operation is imminent. The teams are poised for their orders, but at the moment, it's still too dangerous to attempt to bring them out. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Northern Thailand.
What a dramatic story. Alex, thank you very much. On Wall Street, stocks closed higher. The Dow up 100 points. The S&P gained 23. The Nasdaq up 102. Volume on the big board, 2.5 billion shares. Stocks finished strong to end the week. The Dow up nearly 1%. The S&P up 1.5%. The Nasdaq up nearly 2.5%. The Trump economy continues to boom. 218,000 jobs added in June. That was more than expected. Unemployment went up slightly to 4% as more Americans return to the workforce. And A reminder to listen to Lou's reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. Coming up next, Vice President Pence putting Democrats on the defense over growing calls from the left to abolish ICE. Gina Loudon and Charlie Kirk are here next to discuss.